Okay. So this is Parshat Vayikra, but I would like to say that this past Shabbos, I did go to West Side Institutional Synagogue. I don't know if you're all familiar with it. It's a shul on the Upper West Side, and Rabbi Daniel Sherman is the rabbi. And I always am inspired by what he says. And in this particular case, I asked him if he could give me the sources for some part of his sermon. And I was very blown away by them, by these pieces. So I will, he was kind enough to provide them for me, and I will relate them now before then going on to other Divrei Torah. So again, this is what I heard from Rabbi Sherman, the Rav of West Side Institutional Synagogue. So you'll see the tie-in to the parshios that we just went over. So first of all, he mentioned the Maharal. And what did the Maharal Miprag say? I am descended from the Maharal, which I mentioned on other occasions. And he said, Hine hispa'er lecha ki ru'uyim elu shloshe sheyiyu amudei ha'olam. It will become clear, explained to you, why these three things that I'm about to say are principles of the world, bases of the world. Kasher elu shlosha dvarim mashlimim ha'adam. These three things actually complete the person. Achahu tov b'chol gimel b'chinos asher amarnu. So you already referred to them in the preceding passage, apparently, that in these three ways, so what are these three ways that the Maharal is referring to? So two of them are very familiar to us, but what Rabbi Sherman emphasized, and he brought a Meshach Chachma as well to support this, is the one that we don't really speak of. So the first one, it says, Ubivadai yesh la'adam yachas. I'm just extricating some of the pieces. Ubivadai, and of course, yesh la'adam yachas el bor'o. And of course, a person has a relationship to his creator, b'masha b'ra'o Hashem yisbarach, because God created him. So of course, there has to be a relationship between the person and God, who was his creator, who is his creator. Va'adam nivra mimenu, and a person is actually derived from him, is born from him. So we have that first concept of the relationship bein Adam lamakom, which we all expound upon many times. And then we have the other one. So it says, and he adds, the Maharal, shomer hayachas hazeh. So it's worthwhile that a person really be careful and safeguard the relationship between the person and his creator. And so that's an important one. But in addition to that, we also have that God didn't create a person in a vacuum. Hashem created the world with other people. And this is the one, bein adam l'chaveiro, that we have to be careful with the relationship that a person has between himself or herself and other people, to be good to them, to be kind to them, to have good relationship. So now these two are very familiar to all of us, I'm sure, and we're very medactic on the mitzvos. We're very careful with the commandments that pertain to these two relationships. And now the Maharal, in a philosophical way, refers to the third one that we don't really dwell upon. Ve'od ha'adam nivra la'atzmo. A person is born and has a relationship to himself. Ve'im ha'adam milkul kol be'atzmo ve'eino nechshav harehu bria shel tohu ve'ein bo mamash. person has a responsibility to himself or herself. And if he himself or herself is not careful with that relationship and destroys it, then his existence is rendered meaningless. So let's examine this. What does it really mean? It means you have a responsibility to live up to what you should be. You should be performing whatever you're performing, whatever actions should be good ones, because that is your relationship to yourself. So the Meshech Chachma, then Rabbi Sherman went into a Meshech Chachma that relates actually to the Parshios that we dwelled on in the past few weeks. So who was the Meshech Chachma? So the Meshech Chachma lived in, I believe, the late 1800s. And why is his sefer called Meshech Chachma? Meir Simcha HaKohen, Mem Shin Kaf for Kohen makes Meshech, and Chachma means wisdom. So his sefer is called Meshech Chachma, and he is known as the Meshech Chachma. I believe he lived in the same town as the Rogatchover, and there was a lot of mutual respect. So what we're confronting here is the following situation, that the Meshech Chachma is talking about Avnei Zikaron Livnei Israel. So Avnei Zikaron means the stones of memory. Now, the Kohen Gadol wore on his, breastplate piece, or breastplate, he wore different stones, precious gems. In the preceding week, I discussed the fact that certain of them were referred to as Avnei Miluim, filling stones, yet they each had value. They were precious gems, but they were called filling stones because they had some significance in that respect. These are Avnei Zikaron, and the Meshech Chachma says, why are they referred to in that way? His commentary said, his Perish is Sheyizkiru B'nei Yisrael Sheshmosam Chakukim Be'efod Lifnei Hashem. The different tribes, the different Shvatim, the names of them appeared on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. So they're called the stones of memory, of remembrance, in order to remind Bnei Israel that their names, the names of the tribes, are on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. So v'yispayishu la'asos avera, and they should be embarrassed, therefore, to commit a transgression. And where does this come in? Ukimo she'amru gabe Yosef, and as it said about Yosef. Let's recall that Yosef, when he was in Mitzrayim, before he became elevated to the vice king, he was actually in Potiphar's house, and Eshes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, attempted to seduce Yosef, and she made a strong play for him, but fortunately she was not successful. However, she still accused him. That's why he landed up in jail. She accused him of, once she was rebuffed, she accused him of attacking her, and he landed up in jail. And we know the rest, how he interpreted the dreams of the people in the jail, and then he was brought out to interpret the dreams of Paro. But at the moment that he was confronting Eshes Potiphar, when she attempted to seduce him, it says in the Medrash, Be'osasha basa diukono shel aviv, the countenance of his father appeared to him. So Yosef was there. There was the temptation of Eshes Potiphar, and right away in his mind, He had his father's countenance. And what did the father say? Yosef, asidin banecha sheikasfu al avnei ephod. In the future, your children will be inscribed on the stones of the special breastplate that the Kohen Gadol will wear. Viata beinehem, and your name there too. Do you want do you want that your name should be eradicated from among them? Because you would be called Vatikra Roez Zonos, that you consort with zonos, with prostitutes. So this stopped Yosef from being tempted because he remembered who he was. So that's why these are called Avnei Zikaron, to keep us from doing something wrong, because we have to remember where we come from. So this whole thing of the description of the clothing of the Kohen and all these other things have tremendous significance. So now I will move into what the Rosh Hashiva Rav Hershel Schachter said about this Parsha Vayikra. So apparently, about 50 years ago, well, this Dvar Torah that Rav Hershel Schachter gave, the Rosh Hashiva, was in 2014, so it's closer to 60 years ago. The Yiddish press, he said, carried a news item that the Vad Halacha, the governing board that determined the laws of the conservative movement, issued, so to speak, a response that one may drink Welch's grape juice. Their reasoning was that the Talmud states that there is no prohibition of stam yenam on yayin mevushal. You know, you've probably all seen on the wine bottles, some are designated yayin mevushal, because if you have a wine that was not cooked, then even if it was flash cooked, I think it's considered in that category. But if it's not cooked and it's handled by someone who's a non-Jew, then we can't drink it. So, but they claimed that the Talmud states there is no prohibition on it because they felt that grape juice is cooked and therefore it's available for people to have without the hachshir. So Rav Soloveitchik came into his class the next day after this appeared in the Yiddish press and related this to the students and asked if anyone knows what was incorrect with the statement. The only one among the students who knew anything about the topic at the time was Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who had a smile on his face. And Rav Aaron Lichtenstein said the following, and he explained why, in fact, they were incorrect. So I will get to that in a moment. 1 second. So he explained the following. He said that the main reason that Chazal prohibited stam yenam, what can anyone tell me? Would anyone like to interject at this point? Why they think that the main reason was that stam yenam was prohibited? If anyone would like to, then just make sure to unmute yourselves.
Yeah, they didn't want you getting. They didn't want you getting friendly with.
Right, that's correct.
With a Gentile girl's father because you liked the wine that he made and therefore would marry his daughter.
It could possibly
the expression is mishum chatnut.
Right.
Chatnut, right. So
that's correct.
Marriage, right.
So it's that it would lead to possibly to intermarriage. So the concern that perhaps the Nachri might have used it on the altar of his Avodah Zarah was very minuscule. So, however, once Chazal instituted the prohibition out of concern of chasnas, as you said, they extended the Isur to include even kosher wine handled by a Nachri, lest the Nachri was menasechet for Avodah Zarah, in the event that the wine had previously been cooked, it would be even more unlikely that the Nachri would be menasechet, and therefore, in that case, the touch of the contact of the Nachri, the maga of the Nachri, would not make the wine prohibited. But since in the case of Welch's grape juice, the wine was processed by Nachrim, by Gentiles before being cooked, the fact that they cooked it afterwards was irrelevant. The wine was forbidden because the concern of this chasnus, intermarriage, which is the primary reason for the Isur of Stam Yenim to begin with, still applied, even though the far-fetched concern of it being used for Avodah Zarah no longer applied. The same is true regarding wine. Yayin Mavushal is considered inferior and would not be accepted for Nisuch on the Mizbeach, since it would not be accepted for the Mizbeach and the Beis Hamikdash. We assume that the Nachrim would probably also not use it for their Avodah Zarah. For that reason, if a Nachri handled kosher wine, whereas there is no issue of, of this nesach, yayin nesach, but only, of the, v'nesuin, of the chasnas, but only the concern of nisuch. If the kosher wine had already been mevushal, the chachamim never prohibited it. So now, Yehudit, did you have something you would like to share with us? Or Menachem, do you have something you would like to share with us?
Okay, I'll wait till you hit it.
Oh, okay. So Yehudit,
Yes.
floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So tonight I'd like to share something from Rav Kook on Parashat Zachor.
Would you like to also share your video?
No, I'm not going to share my video tonight. Sorry.
It's okay, whatever you
so-
prefer.
Okay, thank you. So basically, Rav Kook is very interested in the definition of Parashat Zachor and the two descriptions of Bnei Yisrael. So we start off with that Hakadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is the Parashat Zachor. Write this as a memorial in the book, meaning in the Torah. Place it in the ears of Yehoshua. So you have first write it in the book, and then secondly, place it in the ears of Yehoshua. So this commandment is write it and hear it, that Yehoshua has to hear it. For I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. So this is a two-part commandment that it has to be written and it has to be heard. So according to the commandment, Zecher Amalek is to remember the nefarious attack of Amalek against the Jewish people. And there is a dual character of the attack of this, both written in the book and oral in the ears of Yehoshua. And then the question is, isn't the writing in the book, meaning the writing in the Torah, enough? It seems like it doesn't make sense to also have an oral component to this. Does it also have to be transmitted orally? And as we know, when we go to shul and we must hear Parashat Zachor, but we also read the text, follow along the text as we hear, right? So we're even to this day, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu to this day, this is how we observe this commandment. So Rav Kook points to a Mechilta, and he says that the Mechilta cites Rabbi Yoshua, who refers to a memorial in the book. When Amalek attacked Bnei Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu begged HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Master of the universe, this wicked nation comes to annihilate your children. Who will read the book of the Torah that you have given them? Meaning, if Amalek destroys Bnei Yisrael, then who's going to observe the Torah? And then there's a slightly different citation of this by Rabbi Elazar Hamodai, who says, when Amalek attacked Bnei Yisrael, Moshe begged HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, this wicked nation comes to annihilate your children. So all of this sounds like it's very, very similar, but he refers to Bnei Yisrael as your children, whom in the future you will disperse to the winds of the heaven, as it says, as the four winds of heaven, I have spread you. Who will read this book of the Torah that you have given them? So the difference between these two citations between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar Hamodai is A, referring to Bnei Yisrael as your children, and then the second one refers to Rabbi Elazar Hamodai, also refers to the fact that Bnei Yisrael will be scattered to the winds. So there's just it's a subtle difference between the two. And in Rabbi Yoshua's version, Moshe refers to Bnei Yisrael as the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without offering any other further description. Rabbi Elazar Hamodai has Moshe Rabbeinu going on to paint a picture of a people who are destined to one day be scattered to the four winds. So we have two slightly different descriptions. So,
that's beautiful. Thank you. No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. So Rav Kook continues and he says, we've explained the two roles that Bnei Yisrael plays through the generations. When they stood at Har Sinai to receive the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu announced, you shall be to me a Memlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So this refers to a Memlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of priests, means a nation of teachers who will instruct the other nations of the world in the ways of God. And in ancient Israel, the Kohanim served the function of spiritual teachers. This obligation requires of Bnei Israel involvement with the nations of the world. So we're not supposed to be cut off from the world and we're only teaching the Torah amongst ourselves. We're also supposed to be teaching the rest of the world. But on the other hand, Bnei Israel is also supposed to be Goy Kadosh, a holy nation. And as such, Bnei Israel is to dwell apart. So there's an aspect of the nationhood of Bnei Israel that there's a mysterious aspect of this and inexplicable that cannot be expressed to the other nations. So there, on the one hand, you have Bnei Israel who are obligated to be teaching the other nations about the Torah and morality and the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the nations. But on the other hand, that Bnei Israel still have to be apart, dwell apart from the other nations at the same time. And Rav Kook refers to this as a mysterious aspect of the nationhood of Bnei Israel. Then Rav Kook goes on to point out more to these two aspects. He says there are two Torot, the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah, Bnei Israel were commanded to explain to the nations. They were commanded to write the Torah on stones and explain well. And Chazal interpret this to mean in 70 languages. So as indeed, the Torah was proliferated throughout the world, if only in its literal superficial sense. And of course, we know today, even today, we wouldn't necessarily say the Torah, or if you would look it up on Amazon or any bestseller list, that it's still that the Torah or the Bible, as we would say in English, is a bestseller, continues to be a bestseller throughout modern history when people are supposedly not so religious. But the oral Torah, the Talmud, and on the other hand, remain the exclusive mystery of Bnei Israel, that only Bnei Israel really understand the Talmud, that we explain to ourselves the Talmud, and this is something that is not part of what is taught to all of the nations of the world. So Rav Kook quotes the Talmud as saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu established a covenant with Israel only for the sake of the oral law. So, of course, we know that eventually the Mishnah and the discussions that became the Gemara have been written down, but anyone who studies them knows that they're written in such a telegraphic kind of manner that you still need to study them with someone who has the capability of really understanding them in order for you to really understand it. And the methodology of study is passed on between one generation of Bnei Israel and the next. So the Midrash comments on this verse. Shall I write for him, meaning Bnei Israel, most of the Torah? The laws would be considered as a stranger, meaning not that the laws would be alienated, or Bnei Israel would be alienated from these oral laws, because if they were to be written down, it would change the relationship. And again, if you study something with someone, or you're studying the Torah with someone, or you're studying the Mishnah or Gemara with someone, particularly someone who's very learned, and you really feel like you're in the room. We're quoting Rashi, we're quoting Chazal, we're quoting all of the different commentaries, and they're still alive for us. All of these commentaries and discussions are still alive for us, and it's something that is sort of a mysterious thing, because this is the way that we learn, and this is the way that we pass down the Torah to the next generation. So Rav Kook continues: the nations of the world transcribe the Torah, and if it would be all written for Bnei Israel, the nations of the world would copy everything. So this is again, there still must be an oral Torah that is just for Bnei Israel and not for everyone else. So Rav Kook goes back to these two comments of Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar Hamodai to say that they reflect the dual character of Bnei Israel. One part of this character is Bnei Israel's existence as a Goy Kadosh, which defies description. And this is the mystical, ineffable aspect of Bnei Israel. Rabbi Yehoshua offers no description of the Jewish people's role in history. How could he? There's no way for him to describe that. He's focusing only on Goy Kadosh. But then Rabbi Elazar Hamodai has a slightly different description, and his description is Bnei Israel are the people who will be scattered amongst all the nations to the four winds. And this is allusion to Bnei Israel's role as spiritual teacher to the world. And the Talmud, in Rav Kook's words, put it boldly: HaKadosh Baruch Hu exiled Israel among the nations only in order that new followers be added to them. As it says, I planted her in the earth. A man sows a se'ah of seed only that he might harvest several korean of grain. So in other words, it's like a multiplication of Bnei Israel because of the message of the Torah. Amalek, the nemesis of Bnei Israel, opposes Bnei Israel on both grounds, on both of these aspects of its nationhood, objecting to Bnei Israel's role both as a Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of priests, as a teacher of nations, and also as a Goy Kadosh. So these are the two things that Amalek objects to. Moshe begged HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save Bnei Israel in both of these aspects, the undefinable Goy Kadosh, and as a teacher exiled to the nations, to the ends of the earth, in order to teach their students. Rav Kook continues: Amalek's score with Israel is an old one. Amalek is the son of Eliphaz, the son of Esav. Esav's hatred of Yaakov, or Israel, stems from the fact that he deprived him of his birthright. We know the story of Esav, of course. The birthright is something both innate and essential. This corresponds to the aspect of a holy nation, Goy Kadosh, and it also is the blessing. On the other hand, is awarded on a basis of merit. certain good qualities make one deserving of a bracha, and then others correspond to the functional definition of goy kadosh. Mamlechet Kohanim. So a descendant of Amalek, Haman Harasha, would vent his anger against this dual purpose people by saying, and again, these are things that we read so often and we don't really listen to the two aspects again of what Rav Kook is talking about here. There is one people dispersed and divided among the people. So this refers to Rav Elazar HaModai description, and their laws are different from those of every people. So this refers to the oral law, to the Mishnah and the Gemara. And so Rav Kook says, read carefully Haman's accusation. There is one people dispersed and divided among the peoples. So he's saying this is actually a negative aspect of Bnei Yisrael, like a curse of Bnei Yisrael. Haman found Israel intolerable on two counts. He could stand Israel neither as a singular, insulated people, nor as a teacher to the nations. So he rejects Bnei Yisrael as a teacher to the nations, as well as being a goy kadosh. So we started with the controversy in the Mechilta of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar HaModai. The first left Israel's historical mission undefined. The latter gave definition to the role of Bnei Yisrael, your children, whom you shall scatter to the winds, meaning your children, the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whom you will scatter to the winds. And Amalek attacked Bnei Yisrael in a place called Refidim. They asked Rabbi Eliezer for the meaning of Refidim, and he responded, it is just that, Refidim. He has no translation, no explanation. Others say Refidim on account of them having weakened their hands, Rafah Yadayim, from the Torah. So at the time that Bnei Yisrael were at Refidim, their strength in Torah was weakened, and that was why Amalek could attack them. And if you recall, when Moshe Rabbeinu stands at this battle of Amalek, he needs Yehoshua and Aaron to help raise his hand. So this is symbolic of that Bnei Yisrael's hands were weakened, and Moshe Rabbeinu's hands needed help to be strengthened in order to spiritually assist the battle that was going on at that time. So Rav Kook says there is a perfect symmetry between the Talmudic controversy of Rabbi Eliezer and his counterpart, and the Midrashic controversy of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar HaModai. And Refidim, the scene of the battle between Amalek and Yisrael, symbolizes the two aspects of the confrontation. Refidim, according to Rabbi Eliezer, cannot be further defined, just as Bnei Yisrael, a holy nation, cannot further be explained. But the other aspect of Bnei Yisrael that is expressible, as pointed out by Rabbi Eliezer's opposite numbers, as pointed out by Rabbi Eliezer's opposite numbers, is that Israel's role as a teacher of Torah to the world. So just as Amalek would battle Bnei Yisrael on both fronts, so the memory of Amalek's crime must be recorded in both writing and by oral transmission. The written Torah preserves a record of Amalek's attempt to eradicate Israel, the people of the written Torah, whose purpose is to disseminate its teachings throughout the world. Similarly, in the ears of Yehoshua, Boznei Yehoshua, who as Moshe Rabbeinu's most eminent disciple received from him the oral Torah, he will act as a conduit to convey that Amalek opposed the people of the oral teachings, which is the mystery of the Jewish people and its continued survival because of the transmission of the Torah from one generation to another. So just would like to conclude. For me, Parashat Zachor is, well, for everyone it's very special, but for me it's especially and awesome, and I mean awesome as in Nora, not awesome as like a slang expression. An awesome responsibility to hear it and to absorb it, and to also be able to work on behalf of the Jewish people and to help the Jewish people in its struggles in modern times with anti-Semitism. It's a very, very important thing, and I think that there is also lots of work to do for all of us with the situation that we're experiencing today, and especially the the idea that today we would, in the 21st century, that we would see such a terrible war going on in Ukraine with so many Jewish people at risk, as well as, of course, all Ukrainians, all who are innocent civilians who are at risk and being terribly persecuted in this war. So it's a very, very important time for us to both see the text of the parasha and absorb the words, and also absorb the obligations of Bnei Israel to be who we are.
Oh, Yasher Koach, Yehuda, that was beautiful. And it is very moving what you said at the end. Right in the beginning, before the recording started, I said that in addition to the usual people like my parents, my uncle, that I have this class in memory of, I'm dedicating the class to the saving of the lives of the Ukrainians. And we should pray that there should be a good outcome, as difficult a prospect as that seems to be. But, I think we all have to do our part to do whatever we can to help them. So what you said, Yehudit, is especially poignant at this time. So, thank you.
So let me just add one more thing.
Oh, of course.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be political, but so as we know, the description of Amalek is that Amalek attacks the weak, the people who are at the end of the line, meaning not the military people at the head. They're not having a regular fight together with military people. That they attack from behind. That they attack the weak people. They attack the women and the children. And unfortunately, as we have seen in Syria, there were bombings of schools and bombings of hospitals and bombings of civilian areas. And to do such a thing is, in our modern terms, we call it a war crime. But this is the methodology of Amalek, and I'm not trying to compare. I don't have the knowledge. Only Hakadosh Baruch Hu has the knowledge of who is Amalek. But the methodology of attacking someone from behind and attacking innocent people and attacking civilians in schools and hospitals is basically the methodology, and it's very, very, very disturbing. And we need everyone's tefillot and everyone's voices to try to make people more aware of it.
It's unfortunate that these atrocities are, as you said, being committed at this time and this point in time, when we thought we had sort of overcome this kind of war. And it's really, the bellicose aims of Putin are unbelievable. And and the world is more or less standing by and watching and sort of unable to really deter him. So we do have to pray and do whatever we can in terms of supporting the people there to help them. But the outlook is very grim. So thank you, Yehudit. That was a beautiful Dvar Torah that we could all learn from. And I was recently reminded, because of what's happening, of a story that I heard about the Murray Yeshiva, and they escaped, thank God, quite a few of them, and others first to Japan and then to Shanghai. And when they were in Kobe, when they first arrived, shortly afterwards, the government had requested or required, demanded that two leaders of the Jewish people that had arrived, that were escapees from Germany. And let's not forget, Japan and Germany were allies in World War II. And they called them to come to Tokyo. So the people who went were the Amshiner Rebbe and another person that accompanied him. And they went by train. It was a long, arduous trip, I think 13 hours. And they arrived there and they were greeted with several admirals, and it was not a pleasant confrontation. They were put into some, I believe, a windowless room, and they said to the Amshner Rebbe and the other person, they said, what did you actually do? How terrible are your people that the Germans hate you so much? So the Amshner Rebbe responded, they hate us because the Germans consider us to be Asians. He said afterwards, the Ribono Shel Olam put this answer in his mouth. He went on to say the Germans are tall, big people, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. They consider themselves a super race, the Aryans. And they consider us dark-haired, we're not as tall, just like the Asians. And you know something? When the Amshner Rebbe said it to the admirals, they actually felt an empathy towards them, and they changed their whole demeanor. What they did was they actually then called them into some other room. They gave them fruit and vegetables, and they were welcoming. And they said, if you need anything, you don't have to worry, you will be safe with us. So that was a very heartwarming story. And it was, of course, beshert that the Amshner Rebbe gave this response and that they accepted it. And now I would like to share my screen to be able to give you a piece that actually the Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said on this parsha.
Our parasha, which deals with a variety of sacrifices, devotes an extended section to the chatos, the sin offering, as brought by different individuals, first by the high priest, then the community as a whole, then a leader, and finally an ordinary individual. The whole passage sounds strange to modern ears, not only because sacrifices haven't been offered for almost 2 millennia since the destruction of the Second Temple, but also because it's hard for us to understand the very concepts of sin and atonement as they're dealt with in the Torah. You see, the puzzle is that the sins for which an offering had to be brought were those committed inadvertently, b'shogeg. Either the sinner had forgotten the law or some relevant fact. So to give a contemporary example, supposing the phone rings on Shabbos and you answer it, you'd only be liable for a sin offering if either you forgot the law that you can't answer a phone on Shabbos, or you forgot the fact that today is Shabbos. For a moment, you thought it was Friday or Sunday. Now, it's just that kind of act that we don't see as a sin at all. It was a mistake. You forgot. You didn't mean to do anything wrong. And when you realize that inadvertently you've broken Shabbos, you're more likely to feel regret than remorse. You feel sorry, but not guilty. We think of sin as something you do intentionally, yielding to temptation perhaps, or in a moment of rebellion. That's what Jewish law calls bezadon in biblical Hebrew, or b'mezid in rabbinic Hebrew. That's the kind of act we'd have thought calls for a sin offering. But actually, such an act can't be atoned for by an offering at all. So how are we to make sense of the sin offering? The answer is that there are 3 dimensions of wrongdoing between us and God. The first is guilt and shame. When we sin deliberately and intentionally, we know inwardly that we're doing something wrong. Our conscience, the voice of God within the human heart, tells us that we've done wrong. That's what happened to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden after they'd sinned. They felt shame. They tried to hide. For that kind of deliberate, conscious, intentional sin, the only adequate response is tshuva, repentance. And that involves remorse, charata, confession, vidui, and kabbalat ha'atid, a resolution never to commit the sin again. The result is slicha umechila, God forgives us. A mere sacrifice is not enough. However, there's a second dimension. Regardless of guilt and responsibility, if we commit a sin, we've transgressed a boundary. There's something objective about that transgression. The word chet means to miss the mark, to stray, to deviate from the proper path. We've committed an act that somehow disturbs the moral balance of the world. To take a secular example, imagine that your car has a faulty speedometer. You're caught driving at 50 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. You tell the policeman who stops you that you didn't know. Your speedometer was only showing 30 miles an hour. He may sympathize, but you've still broken the law. You've transgressed the limit, and you will still have to pay the penalty. Now, that is what a sin offering is. According to Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, it's a penalty for carelessness. According to the Sefer Chinuch, it's an educational and preventative measure. Deeds in Judaism are the way we train the mind. So the fact that you've had to pay the price, a penalty, by bringing a sacrifice will make you take greater care in the future. Rabbi Isaac Arama in the Akedat Yitzchak in Spain in the 15th century says that the difference between an intentional and an unintentional sin is that in an intentional sin, both the body and the soul were at fault. But in the case of an unintentional sin, only the body was at fault, not the soul. Therefore, a physical sacrifice helps, since it was only the physical act of the body that was in the wrong. A physical sacrifice can't atone for a deliberate sin because it can't rectify a wrong in the soul. What the sacrifice then achieves is kapara, which doesn't mean forgiveness. It means covering over or obliterating the sin. Noah was told to cover v'chafarta, the surface of the ark, with pitch. The cover of the ark in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, was called a kaporet. Once a sin has been symbolically covered over, it's forgiven. But as such, the Malbim points out that in such cases, the verb for forgiveness, slach, is always in the passive, v'nislach. The forgiveness here isn't direct, as it is in the case when you repent, but indirect. It's a consequence of the sacrifice. And the third dimension of a sin is that it defiles. It leaves a stain on your character. Isaiah, in the presence of God, feels that he has unclean lips. King David says to God, "Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." About Yom Kippur, the Torah says, on that day, atonement will be made for you to cleanse you, letaher etchem. Then before the Lord, you will be clean from all your sins. And Ramban says that that is the logic of the sin offering. Any sin, even one you've committed unintentionally, leaves a stain on the soul, in his words, and constitutes a blemish on it. And the soul is only fit to meet its maker when it's been cleansed from all sin. So the result of the sin offering is tahorah, cleansing, purification. So the sin offering isn't about guilt, it's about other dimensions of transgression. And it's actually one of the stranger features of Western civilization, due partly to Pauline Christianity and partly to the influence of the philosopher Immanuel Kant, that we tend to think about morality and spirituality as matters almost exclusively to do with the mind and its motives. But our acts also leave traces in the world, and even unintentional sins can leave us feeling defiled. So the law of the sin offering reminds us that we can do harm unintentionally, but this can have psychological consequences. The best way of putting things right is to make a sacrifice, to do something that costs us something. In ancient times, that took the form of a sacrifice offered on the altar at the temple. Nowadays, the best way of doing so is to give money to tzedakah, to charity, or to perform an act of kindness, of chesed to other people. The prophet said so long ago. Hosea said, in the name of God, I desire loving kindness and not sacrifice. So charity and give acts of kindness are our substitutes for sacrifice. And like the sin offering of old, they help mend what is broken in the world and in our soul. Shabbat Shalom.
So first of all, if anyone would like to make any comments about any of the preceding Divrei Torah, by all means, please unmute yourselves.
Rebecca, I just wanted to say that I heard that story about the Kamshana Rabbi, that he said, you know, why do the Germans hate you so much? And he responded, because we're Asians like you. I heard that so many times because my father-in-law escaped via the Meir Yeshiva. So it was very beautiful that you mentioned it. Thank you so much.
Oh, I didn't know that your Barry's father was actually there as one of
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful that he was, his life was
And in
spared.
Shanghai, they didn't know the timing for Yom Kippur. They observed 2 days. So for 4 years that they were in Shanghai, they would drink just a little bit of water between the first day of Yom Kippur and the second day of Yom Kippur, and then they would observe 2 days of Yom Kippur.
The main thing is, that's very difficult. I mean, even one day is very hard for everyone, but 2 days in a row in rapid succession is really difficult. But the main thing is that thank God they were spared.
Thank God. Yeah.
From those Rishaim. But I'm glad you shared it, Sophie. Yes, that's really a remarkable story. And as the Amshna Rebbe said, that's what was Hashem put in his mind. And it worked, thank God. And I would like to say that I heard that tonight is the yahrzeit of Reb Zev Wolf ben Rab Naftali Tzvi from Chernow, Astrau. And he apparently said that if people will say his name, they can ask for whatever they would like on, and especially on the night of his yahrzeit, and Hashem will hopefully grant whatever their wishes are. So it's an opportune time for people to pray for whatever they need. And as I mentioned, my mother's yahrzeit is rolled around again because it's Adar Sheni. So we count the first one as the primary, but the year that my mother was niftar there was only one Adar, but we still light a candle on a yahrzeit candle on Zion Adar of Adar Beis. And I would like to say one slight reflection about my mother. You know, my father was the Rav of a shul on the Lower East Side, and my mother had a spot that she would sit in normally on Shabbos, and I would sit next to her. And what happened was that sometimes someone else would come there and unknowingly occupy the spot. And then we would come, and my mother never told the person this is her seat or anything. In fact, other people would say, oh, this is the Rebbitzin seat. My mother refused to sit there. My mother felt she could sit anywhere. She never wanted to displace someone who sat there. And my mother was extremely humble. And that's the trait that I feel is really the main characteristic of my mother, that she was very humble. She was highly intelligent, and she was the daughter of a Rebbe, but she really was completely unassuming. So if anyone would like to say anything and make any comments about the situation now or anything else, or the Divrei Torah, so speak up, please.
All right. So first of all, may your mother's neshama have an aliyah.
Amen.
Second, both my parents here at sites are in Adar, and
Oh,
I
may
asked the Shaila.
Shamos have an aliyah in
Thank
heaven.
you. I asked the Shaila about which Adar to keep, and I was told that it's not a simple answer. But it turns out that the Ashkenazim keep Adar Aleph and the Sephardim keep Adar Beis. And a lot of people will still commemorate the other Adar anyway.
Yeah, that's what we do. We consider the first one the primary, but we still light a candle in the second one. And of course, there are those people who were actually niftar in a specific Adar in a year when there were two. So that would probably be
Right,
the
so that solves the problem for them, but
right. But for everyone else, right. It's so I'm sorry about your parents, Shalom, and may their neshamos have an aliyah.
I mean, thank you.
So with that, thank you all for coming. And
Once again, thank you for arranging it.
Oh, my pleasure. And Yehudit, Yoshe Koach again for your beautiful Dvar Torah that we all learned from. And same time, same channel next week, God willing. So take care and
Thank you.
Have a great week, everyone.
you too.